welcome to OBN Horn of Africa. This is Future Africa show. In this edition today, we're going to discuss about our ongoing situation in Ethiopia, and I'm joined by Dr. Bisrat Lemessa from Massachusetts. Dr. Bisrat, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, as it is all known, the US government is these days very busy in mongering war in Ethiopia. How do you see that?
You're right. That's an interesting development in Ethiopia's international relations, in particular Ethiopia's relations with the United States of America, particularly the government. It's important to put into perspective the strategic significance of Ethiopia in the region and also globally. So there are a lot of factors that are considered in how the US government is behaving these days. And from that angle, I know it's a bit troubling for Ethiopians back home and also in the diaspora. But in my perspective, what matters is understanding why the US is doing what the US government, in particular, I would like to distinguish between the US government and the US as a country. Why the US government, in particular Biden's administration, is doing what it is doing right now, what we can do, and how we can avert developments that may go against the stability of our country. So if you'd like me to delve into what I believe why what is happening is happening this way, then I can do that.
The US government has recently briefed that as its troops involve and settle and secure peace in Ethiopia. Does that work out?
That's a very difficult question. First of all, the US government has a geopolitical interest in the Horn of Africa, and Ethiopia is an important country in the Horn of Africa. So why is the US government paranoid these days about political developments in Ethiopia? A lot of issues. One, as you know, the Red Sea is an important maritime trade route, and it wants to secure its influence in the region in that way. Two, there are regional forces that have economic and political interest in Ethiopia, but also at the same time allies of the US government. So what the US government does is protecting the interests of those allies in the Middle East, in the Gulf countries, by pressuring the government in Ethiopia. Apart from that, during the TPLF regime, Ethiopia's foreign relations were entirely captured by the party's interest and also the officials of the TPLF. So when the TPLF was pushed from the center of politics, all the networks that were developed in the name of Ethiopia were gone to be used by the TPLF. If you remember, most of our embassies were staffed by TPLF people or their sympathizers. So when they stepped aside, all those diplomatic missions were almost empty, and we had to start from the scratch. So those people are now using their network that they developed in the name of Ethiopia to sabotage the government, to promote disinformation. They're using their networks to put pressure on the government. So we must understand all that. And some of those people are embedded in Biden's administration. Officials in Biden's administration were cozy with TPLF officials. Some TPLF sympathizers have now gone on to lead important international organizations, like the general director of the World Health Organization, and also other people in human rights organizations and so on. So in terms of what is going on, a lot of these factors are coming into play. But Coming back to the specific question that you mentioned about US troops in Ethiopia, frankly speaking, I don't think it is something that is going to happen easily. It may happen, they may push for that, but it all depends on how Ethiopians react, how they counter the discourse that is already surfacing. So the way it works is that certain media outlets come up with these narratives, and then people start to buy that, and that's how they shape public opinion. And then from being shocked, we get into the point of being kind of familiar with that talk through time. So if we can effectively counter that, how that goes against the principles of sovereignty, how that is utterly disastrous for the region, for the country of 110 million people, then I think we can avert that. But at this point, such suggestions by military generals and so on is meant to spread panic, so that people give up and say, you know what, this giant military enterprise is going to attack us, and what can we do? So let's just sit and wait, or let's put pressure on the government so that we wouldn't collide with that. So that's how I see. For the timing, it's part of the propaganda war, it's part of the psychological war. There are a lot of international platforms, frameworks that it needs to come through at this point. Unilateral decisions by the US government, let alone military interventions, but also even financial and economic sanctions are fiercely resisted, opposed. A lot of countries are objected to that. So we can work around that, intensify that, and make this a daydream instead of a reality.
Okay, TPLF is physically confronting the National Defense Force and the regional militias, but behind the scene, global media these days are disseminating false propaganda to weakening the federal government through a kind of hybrid war. How do you analyze that as a political analyst?
One thing we need to again understand about the global media is this. For too long, many of us believed that the media is neutral, non-partisan, and committed to principles, right? But we forget that the media conglomerate is either sponsored by states that have political, economic, and military interests, or at least they are regulated by state bodies. In other cases, they're sponsored by the neo-colonial forces, referring specifically to economic entities and that have significant leverage on how Western countries make political decisions. So what is why we're shocked is because we have been expecting too much out of the global media when that hasn't been the case. They work representing the interests of anybody who sponsors them or owns them. In that case, then why is it that we expect them to speak on our behalf? Why do we expect them to be impartial when it comes to Ethiopia? So we need to put that into perspective. If the political elites from the West, from powerful economies, are working against Ethiopia, then why would we expect the Western media to counter their elites' narratives? Okay. So that is one thing. On the other hand, let me finish this. I'm sorry. At the same time, what is it that we're doing as local media? In some cases, it is really disappointing to see a local media translating Al Jazeera that has traveled to somewhere in Afar where TPLF bombed an IDP camp. Instead of us going there and writing our stories, telling our own truth, we rely on the same media that are working against us. So I look at it from all those angles.
Okay, let me get back to your previous notion. You've said Ethiopia is very important place from the perspective of geopolitical strategy. You've mentioned Red Sea is there, and the Djibouti military base for the US is there. When we conclude this, Ethiopia is very vital for the US. But when we just see things on the ground, it doesn't seem that Ethiopia is geostrategically important for the US based on the situation that the US government is doing these days. Rather, the US government is working to destabilize the country. Even they went to the extent of evacuating their citizens, their ambassadors and embassy workers as well. How do you comprehend this?
So when we say Ethiopia is an important strategic country for the US, it doesn't mean the current government is an important ally of the US government. So we need to understand why was the various US government administrations, why were they cozy with TPLF over the past 3 decades against all the odds, with all the poor human rights track record, with all the authoritarian practices, with all the massacres and repression. Why weren't those administrations speaking against the brutal crackdown by TPLF on civil society and so on? So, there is again a distinction between being an ally of a government in Ethiopia and Ethiopia as a country being an important strategic place for the US government. So in that sense, we need to understand what has been happening over the past 3 years. What happened? Ethiopia settled its dispute with Eritrea. So, and then also the Prime Minister has been working really hard to pacify the region, mediating between factions in Sudan, in South Sudan, trying to strengthen the federal Somali Republic, also trying to go between Kenya and Somalia, Djibouti and Eritrea. So, this pacification is going to transform into a regional integration, and that regional integration will, I should say, promote economic development, strengthen military cooperation, and also politically, the region, Horn of Africa, may come out as a solid block of influence. That is going on one hand. On the other hand, that may not really be impressive for the US. So as an important ally, what they need is a government that is willing to do whatever the US government wants it to do, not a government that has its own vision, that stands on its own feet, that tries to pursue its own development agenda, and when requests from the US go against the interests of the country, that can say, no, I cannot go beyond this point. Probably we also need to see that the US government currently is paranoid when it comes to the growing influence of China, Russia, other rivalries like Turkey, and even Iran and so on. And Ethiopia has for so long been following these non-aligned stance when it comes to these different poles growing around the world. So at this point, what the US government wants is a government that is solidly on its side and willing to push other rivalries, out of its country. So in that sense, Ethiopia being this point of entry into Africa, what happens in Ethiopia has significant leverage on what may happen in other parts of Africa. What happens in Ethiopia may have leverage on other parts of Africa. Countries that have influence in Ethiopia may have influence in other African countries and all that. So Ethiopia being that important gateway into Africa. So, is this government really slipping Ethiopia out of our hands? Is it going to take a route over which we don't have any control? So all these are making them paranoid. So I would say, at this point, why are they really with TPLF? Why are they supporting TPLF? I believe supporting TPLF in their calculations is the cheapest way to remove the government without going to unilateral interventions, without trying to have the UNC or other blocs marshaled behind them against Ethiopia. Probably the cheapest, the easiest way is riding TPLF. TPLF that is willing to sacrifice tens of thousands of Tigrayan youth, that is willing to massacre civilians along its way, loot and destroy properties, that is willing to do anything. There is no accountability. Who holds TPLF accountable? Nobody. So, by supporting TPLF in different ways, diplomatically, morally, in some cases by providing military information and so on, they want to see if these rogue elements can push the government in Ethiopia off the table. So it doesn't mean the US is really in love with TPLF, but TPLF is an instrument to get rid of the government.
What will be the counter-reaction of other superpower nations from the side of Russia and China if the US deploys its troops?
Well, first of all, that interview was, I would say, put out of context by BBC when it was reported. In particular, the way they gave the title was disingenuous. Frankly, they wanted to send a shockwave across Ethiopia and the region, as if the US was preparing to step in right away. So basically, the US government has military bases across Africa, and they have these rapid response teams that are there to respond during times of crisis. So they've been sitting there all the time. So anytime something went wrong, they would have reacted in that sense, at least to protect their citizens and properties and so on. So one, let's look at it that way. Two, how did the US government or officials in the US government get to this point? If you see, from the very beginning, they tried to marshal the UNSC behind their interest. It didn't work. They tried to convince the African Union to take a negative stance against Ethiopia. It didn't work. They tried to convince members of the Security Council, particularly the permanent ones, that they should take again a strong stance against Ethiopia. It didn't work. They tried economic sanctions, trade, arms embargo, threatening rhetoric. What is left? They have tried everything. So such statements basically, well, a crisis is unfolding, we need to evacuate our citizens, or we may step in. All these come out of despair. They've tried everything, and it didn't work. They've tried to divide the government. They've tried to divide the Ethiopian public. It didn't work. So let's look at it that way. But what would the others do? Well, we've seen that the UN Security Council couldn't, let alone giving a green light to such unilateral interventions. For many times, the members couldn't even agree on a statement to be released on behalf of the Security Council. So I believe members are already opposed to unilateral decisions, including economic sanctions, as I said, let alone military interventions. But we should also be careful that this does not evolve into another world war. You know what I mean? It's not only the US government that has interest in Ethiopia. Other really militarily and economically powerful countries also have interest in Ethiopia. But what matters the most is what we do on the ground, how we win the various battles, how we win the information war, how we stick together as a nation. And as long as the TPLF and its stooges are out there, these are marketable rebel forces. So when, like I said, other countries, instead of doing this on their own, they want to ride such forces. And Ethiopians really need to take Trojan horses very seriously. There are men and women out there fighting, sacrificing their lives. And what are we doing as Ethiopians to help, to support, to strengthen the resistance movement, the defense? So if we can do this, if everybody contributes their part financially, technically, materially, then I think as long as we can have a decisive victory on the ground, the noise will quieten, at least temporarily, until they come up with another excuse to put pressure.
Okay. Dr. Bisrat Lemessa, thank you for your precious time and valuable insight. All right. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, I would like to say thank you very much on behalf of our media house.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Bye-bye. Dear viewers, this brings you to the end of our edition for today. Bye-bye. See you next time with another edition.